And hello, everyone. My name is Nicole, and today we have our first PatternFly community meeting of updates for 2021. We don't have as packed of an agenda as we sometimes have, so hopefully we will even have an opportunity for some questions if anybody has some. But today we have 2020 PatternFly content year in review we're going to start with, and updates from various different teams that work on PatternFly, and a look ahead to what we are planning to work on in the near future. So with that, I will hand it over to Alana to get us started.
Thanks, Nicole. So that's actually a little typo on the agenda. Kevin and I are going to be presenting about PatternFly's design guidelines today. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. There you go.
Let me share my screen for everybody. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
So good morning, everyone. Like I said, my name is Alana, and you recognize me from work across PatternFly's content and social media channels. And this morning, I'm very excited to be co-presenting with Kevin, a user interaction designer on Red Hat's UXD team, making his PatternFly community meeting debut. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Kevin as I hand him the metaphorical mic to share the background and inspiration behind this new effort to elevate and streamline our component design guidelines. So without further ado, Kevin, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alana. And as she mentioned, my name is Kevin Hatchoua, one of the newer UX designers joining the PatternFly team, helping support the improvement and enhancement being made to our design system. So you're here today because we like to think of PatternFly as built by the community for the community. The changes that we make are primarily driven by the feedback we receive from all of you. So on the behalf of the team and UXD, we really like to extend our thanks for all your contributions. The PatternFly community is at the core of everything we do. Although the design system started as an internal project, over time it's grown to be much bigger than that. And you don't necessarily need me to tell you that. And we believe that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that is why we rely heavily on the contributions from across the spectrum, from designers to developers to writers, product owners, and many other flyers with various hats. Our collective goal is to create a delightful and consistent experience across all products, projects, and interfaces that rely on PatternFly. This means ensuring that they're accessible, inclusive, and intuitive. And as we grow, we want to keep a tight feedback loop with our community, with all of you, and nurture these relationships to make sure that we're building solutions that are setting you up for success. Now that is all great, but PatternFly does not only aspire to be a centralized place for documentation on UX best practices. Part of the challenges that we're often facing is making sure that our guidelines are both easily accessible and consumable. As we work towards making PatternFly more usable, we would like to take a collaborative approach at addressing some of the most pressing issues. Following a recent audit, we identified various areas in need of improvements. And during our audit, we surfaced issues with our guidelines, content structure, the hierarchy, and the labeling of certain key terms. Findability was also another issue, as it was not always clear where the content is or how to access it. We have designers that might look in one area, developers in another, and whereas we need to create a consistent and intuitive experiences for all audience. The last bucket of issues that we identified were relevant to accessibility. We have in-depth guidelines surrounding the topic, but documents and components reference them in various ways, and they can sometimes be misleading or confusing depending on how they're interpreted. And as I previously mentioned, taking on these challenges is a collaborative effort, and we would like to invite you all to help us shape our vision. And with that, I will segue to Alana, who will tell us a bit more about how we plan to tackle on these issues.
Kevin. So over the past year, we've made significant strides in building out our UX writing style guide, which is PatternFly's go-to source for writing microcopy that's accessible, readable, and usable. And now we're looking to elevate more content experiences across PatternFly by extending those same principles into how we write and maintain our design documentation. We'll accomplish this mission by creating, updating, and maintaining a more consistent approach to documenting component design guidelines for our PatternFly community. It sounds like a big effort, and it is. I narrowed it down to 3 main avenues for action. The first is conducting content audits, deep dives into our existing guidelines to find and evaluate key content patterns, terms, and trends. Next, we'll host workshops, polls, and discussions to hear from varied perspectives across our community. We want to empower our community every step of the way to shape and influence the future of our design documentation in the way that best suits you. Through design shares and community meetings just like this one, we hope to connect with you and get your feedback about content best practices and architectural factors that impact the way you navigate and use our design documentation. And the third component of this is user research and content testing. We'll perform iterative testing throughout the process to learn more about how you use our documentation and how we can improve it along the way. And this effort falls right into our ongoing mission to advancing PatternFly toward becoming a best-in-class design system, the open source way. Best-in-class design systems don't let their content gather dust. With stronger, streamlined, and breathing guidelines, we can confidently onboard new flyers and support our existing ones, knowing that we're providing the content tools they need to get the job done. We plan on beginning and progressing this process the best way we know how, in the open. And that's where you come in. You can help us by guiding us toward guidelines that best support you. Great content begins with great context, and in the coming weeks, we'll be working to learn more about how flyers like you engage with our design guidelines so that we can build a more streamlined and intuitive documentation customized to that experience. So as a start, I'd like to invite us to think and discuss these 3 questions. How do you use PatternFly design guidelines in your own work? What kind of information do you prioritize? Is it easy to find, to use? Do you have any pain points, concerns, or areas you'd like to see improve? So I'd like to take a moment to open the floor if anyone has any initial thoughts or questions on these topics, or even just take some time to consider them. So I invite anyone to share their thoughts in the chat or off mute, or just take a bit of time to consider these. I actually don't have the chat open, so if there are messages in there, would someone mind letting me know? Sorry.
No worries, Alana. And also, we're working on creating a form as well that we'll plan to distribute out. So, if in the moment you can't gather your thoughts, or just there may be some things that you've thought about in the past that that may not necessarily come up right now. We'd definitely like to share that with you to gather some of the feedbacks relevant to these 3 topics.
Absolutely. And the next leg of the presentation actually goes through some next steps that tie directly into that form that Kevin was talking about. So if nobody has any thoughts at this moment in time, I'll jump into how everyone can jump on board going forward. First step is to get informed. So we've started a centralized project document for the community to gain more context and insight into these design guideline efforts. We'll update this reflected roadmap throughout our content journey so that you can stay informed and in the loop all along the way. The next step is to get involved. So our PatternFly community thrives when we think, speak, and collaborate in the open together. Improving our design guidelines will be no different. This ongoing and progressive effort will be shaped together. So if you want to get involved, we're looking for flyers interested in contributing to workshops, participating in user research and test sessions, editing our existing guidelines, and more. I'll drop a link in the chat after the presentation where you can fill out a Google form to start getting involved. And then the last step, and I think the most important step, is to get inspired. So this isn't a standalone effort, and since our documentation is a living and breathing resource for our community, our design guidelines will be too. Our design guideline efforts will be too. There's plenty of road ahead and plenty of possibilities on the horizon. So join us on our journey to build and define more consistent, findable, and inclusive design guidelines. We're only just getting started. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks, Alana.
Yes, thank you. I would be happy to include a reminder to consider these questions in the follow-up email I send with the presentation and the recording after this meeting. So hopefully people can continue to reflect and provide feedback.
Nicole,
if you have a link
really
to the
helpful.
form, yeah, if you have a link to the form, I could also include that. If it's not ready yet, though, that's also totally fine.
I'm going to drop 2 links in the chat. So there's a link to the project document and then a link to the form to get involved.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the accessibility update from Jessie.
Hey guys, and great presentation, Alana and Kevin. That was awesome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see this okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. So the first one I want to share with you guys is an accessibility consideration with Nav. We noticed that the links were not becoming keyboard accessible, or there was an issue with it. So to show what I mean, basically, if you have all of these links in your navigation, the issue that we found was that regardless of whether this was open or not, we could still navigate to that link by keyboard. So I added an href really quick to show you guys. You know, obviously you'd want to go there in the case that it's open, but if it's closed, you would want to be able to go straight to the page. But as you can tell, it shows like a little link because you're still navigating to it, which may not seem like a big deal, but if you have, let's say, 40 links in your navigation, a keyboard user has to tab through 40 times before they can ever get to the main content of your page, which can be really frustrating for a keyboard user. So we fixed that. And now with the current update with the navigation, they update as you open and close. So when it's closed, you're not navigating to it, and when it's open, you do. So that's the very first one that I wanted to share with you guys. Another smaller one to share was there was a scope issue on table. And what was happening here is that on the edge of the table, it scrolled up funny. Right on this one, we see that it was adding an empty scope, which, again, one of those things that may not seem like a big deal when you just see it, but it can actually impact the screen reader, and it will also flag on axe. And so if you have axe testing, this could fail. So we made sure that we updated that and fixed that, adding extra logic so that it would actually detect when it needs to be added and when it shouldn't, so that we avoid adding extra scopes. And then a third small update in addition has been some documentation. We want to constantly making sure that we are updating our accessibility guidance for all of you to make sure that we are communicating the best information for you guys. So we updated the alert group accessibility information, kind of giving further guidance in terms of how to use the alert group and how to make this more accessible for our users. And kind of similar to the previous presentation, I definitely invite you guys to give feedback on documentation. I would really love to continue improving our accessibility guidance for both components and overall. So if there's a certain component that you notice that could be improved in terms of how to use it or how to make it more accessible, for example, in this situation, we were talking about toast notifications and how to make sure that information is still available to different types of users. So if there's a specific component that you want to give feedback, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. But those are the top 3 accessibility improvements that I wanted to share with you guys that I thought might be interesting. And I guess I'll pass it back off to Nicole.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm grateful that you take the time to show us in the code what exactly is happening, because a lot of the terminology is I'm still learning, so seeing it firsthand is helpful. Our next update is from Core. I think Michael is going to lead us through that.
Hey, yep, just a sec. On the screen. Okay, up first, we've enhanced the card component to support dividers or separators between the body elements in the card. So you can just, this isn't a special feature or element of the card, it's just using our divider component. But if you place them between the card title and the card body, card footer, etc., you get the properly spaced and presented divider component. So that's pretty cool. And then up next, we've added an enhancement to the form component. It's called field groups. And this is just an example of what a form might look like with a regular label and input pair there, and then a field group. And so field groups can be expandable. They support a title, a description, some actions, and then they're nestable as well, and they're infinitely nestable. So here's a nested field group with the same title, description, action, with form controls underneath it that's nested inside of one. Here's a collapsed variation, and the example is pretty long. It shows the different nesting options. So that's really neat. And up next, we've built a slider component. So you can see this here. It's got a lot of cool doodads that you can add and remove to it. You can add the ticks or steps or stops along the way, or it can just be a continuous kind of thing with none of that and just a simple slider thumb. You can also have a value input associated with the slider, and so that's another way to represent and manipulate the slider itself. And then you can have a value input that's attached to the thumb. So you slide the thumb, and that value input follows the thumb, and then you can associate actions with your slider as well, before and after, as you see fit. So that's real generic, and these actions are just demos. You could put whatever you wanted in there. Up next, our progress component. Got a small enhancement just for just a visibility kind of thing, and it's when you have stacked progress components that they're aligned with one another with no content in between them, and each of them have this value represented on the far end. There's a variation now to this value that gives it a specific width, and so it's when typically this value box will only be as big as the content inside of it. And so if you have stacked progress components, your progress line might be longer on one progress element than it would be with another if the value had a different number of characters inside of it. And so now you can apply a static width to this value, and stacked progress components will align well, and then that static width is customizable depending on the type of content that you have inside of it. Here's another example of what that looks like. And then up next, with the gallery layout, I covered in the last meeting that there's a variable that you can set now to modify the min width of a gallery item. And so we added a max width. And so now we're using a min max function to determine the item's width, and you can specify both a min and a max. And so your columns will be fluid depending on the type of content, the size of the viewport, and that sort of thing if you modify the min max. And then up last, with the pagination component, we used to display the pagination differently on a small screen than we did on a large screen, and we still do that. It's just that we've given users the option to opt into the small screen display or the large screen display at different breakpoints, and so it's fully responsive. You can switch back and forth as the screen gets bigger if you want, or you can customize the breakpoint at which we display the smaller version of the pagination than the larger version of the pagination. And so this is the smaller version. It's called display summary, and then this is the large variation, and it's called display full. So if you wanted to allow your pagination to take up more or less space at a different breakpoint, you can do that now. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Our next update is from React, the React team, and the first demo will come from Katie.
Yep, hi there. I'm going to share my screen once I allow it to do that, because my new computer doesn't have my system settings, apparently.
Waiting for my new computer. We're going to have the same stuff. I'll have to make sure I set it all up before I have to run the next community meeting. Give her a moment. There she is.
Maybe rejoin.
Yep.
All right,
Yep.
sorry about that.
No problem.
I should be sharing my screen now.
Yep.
All right, so we have a new feature for drawer as well as a lot of improvements for said feature. And that feature is resizable drawer. So we have a bunch of new examples in drawer, and basically when you toggle the drawer, you will now see a little splitter. If you have the resizable flag, using the mouse, you can click on the splitter, hold and drag to resize the entire drawer panel. This will be persisted if you toggle the drawer back and forth. And then if you're going to use keyboard, which I will do right now, you can shift your focus over to the splitter, press space to begin the drag operation, and then you can use the arrow keys to navigate to resize the drawer at different increments. This one is demonstrating an increment of 50 pixels per arrow key movement. And then you can use enter or escape to stop the movement, where if you continue to use arrow keys after stopping, it doesn't block your input at all. Then, pull up my little notes here so I get all of them in. We've made several improvements based on feedback as well, in addition to the actual feature itself. So first up, we can added a minimum, maximum, and default size properties. So you can see even here that this has a minimum size, so I can't actually drag the drawer smaller than this minimum size. You can also set the maximum size, which will default just to the container's width. So I could scroll down here real quick and just say, if I wanted a max size of, let's say, like 600 pixels, then that means I can't drag it greater than 600 pixels in width. Default size is kind of like the starting size, so if you set that, that'll be the first size the drawer will go to on an expansion. And then you can also, have a callback that we added on resize that can capture the new width if you wanted to persist that between different page views. So then whenever you pass this function back, it'll then return you the new width on a resized end. So if I drag it, end it, this new width of the panel will be sent back to the user so you can persist that data. We also have fixed a couple of edge cases. We handled resizable drawers on small screens, which I can quickly demonstrate here. This is the same bright example. If I resize the drawer and then I make the screen width very thin, it will do 100% width instead of maintaining that relative size for small screens. They used to not do that. We also handle iframes that are inside the drawer. We don't have an example of this right here, but if you have an iframe that's inside of a drawer, it used to eat the event, so the drag event would no longer work because of the way iframes work. So now we handle at least iframes within a drawer. We also have fixed the bottom drawer for inline. It used to not expand correctly and consume some height, but it no longer does that and behaves properly, easily enough. This will just show you, you can do left resizable drawers, which also has a minimum width displaying. And we have drawers on the bottom, which instead of going up, you'd go up or down instead of left or right with arrow keys. Shows you a default 5 pixels. And we also have resizable supported for the inline drawer. So you can see the text is expanding and contracting to fit the new size of the drawer. We also recently had done some improvements to performance and cursor lag with the drag event. So it should be a lot more snappy and responsive now. And there are more improvements to come. And that's it for me.
It's been a big collaborative effort headed by Katie to get a lot of this done, but it's beautiful. The next React update is from Titani.
Hey, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So this is an update that's contributed by Boaz. He updated the alert component to now allow for custom icons in the alert instead of the standard icons we have for the alerts. So now you can just specify the prop custom icon, and then you can add whatever icon you want for an alert. And that's it.
Awesome. And for me, I also have a React update. I have been working on the date and time picker sum with help of Zach. So in this latest release, there is a new date picker demo that demonstrates how to use our date picker to build a date range picker. And it is relatively snazzy there. We have also updated the date picker so that it doesn't use any third-party dependencies like date functions. So you have a lot more control over the parsing of dates and the validation of dates. And it won't require any external dependencies. So that is very handy. We also implemented the time picker. The time picker includes validation that it's a valid time and allows for either 12-hour time with AM and PM or a 24-hour time, depending on the props that you set. It also comes with a type ahead and menu that is not showing every time possible, but doing its best to try to help the user complete their times if they want, based on what. So for example, if I start typing 11, it guesses that since I am currently in the morning, that I might be talking about 11 a.m. As it gets to the afternoon, it'll autocomplete and guess for PM. Let's see, there are some props. There are quite a few props that the user can provide that will do things like change the increments that are in the dropdown. If you want to encourage only selecting on the hour, or have the speech just be a shorter list of times. It's fully keyboard accessible and is in beta right now, so we would love feedback, as this is a new component. And what you can expect to see hopefully soon is a demo for creating a date and time range picker, as well as a few other enhancements. But I know a lot of people have been asking about the time picker, so it is released and ready to be played with. So please let us know what you think. And that is all that I have about that update. Yeah, okay. The next agenda item is a peek at what we are working on from Matt Carrano.
Hi, everyone. I know in these meetings have been very focused on demonstrating new things that we have recently added to the library. And from time to time, we do get requests from folks just saying, hey, it would be great to know a little bit more about what you guys are working on and what we should expect to see coming up in the future. So in response to that, at this meeting and at meetings going forward, I'm going to just add a little bit at the end to talk about some of the work in progress. So with that, let me share my screen out. Okay, is everybody seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, so what we're working on. So the design team is currently, some of the major items that we're currently working on is a new topology view that will allow for displaying topologies within our products. Michael Saladonia has been leading that effort. Secondary horizontal navigation. We currently have a primary navigation and a what we call tertiary navigation, which is like a tab bar, but we're rethinking that horizontal navigation approach a little bit to potentially introduce a new horizontal sub-navigation that could be used in situations where that is being called for, either as a secondary bar with a masthead horizontal navigation, or in combination with the vertical navigation that's used in most of our products today. Looking at making some enhancements to the accordion component to be more acceptable for marketing and web use cases, mostly adjusting the spacing here in a new variant. We've been working for the past couple of months on defining a PatternFly dark theme, which is something that we look forward to adding sometime later this year, and likewise adding animation strategically in certain places in the library. You can always, these links, by the way, will take you to the active issues if you want to drill into and drill further into any of these items. We also have a workspace where we track these items in a Zen Hub board, where you can see very slow to load sometimes. I've already got it open, so let me just click over to the Open tab. This board is where we track all of the ongoing design requests and work. So there's a lot of details here, but if you ever want to dig into what the design team is doing and who's working on what, you can visit this board. Next, the core HTML CSS team is some of the major items that they are working on or will be working on in coming sprints. A new tree table component for representing hierarchical tabular data. Updates to the label visuals. So we have a label component. We realized that the current labels we have don't always display well on a variety of backgrounds, especially on light gray backgrounds. So we're making some minor visual tweaks to those to make sure that all of our labels have an outline border, so they will not blend in with any background. Adding a show hide password option. We're working on some refactoring of the masthead to make that more responsive and more flexible. That's something that we hope to be able to release in the first half of this year, and also introducing the ability on a definition list to support pop-up help via underlined labels. This was a request for reducing some of the clutter in these views with where we have lots of attributes on the screen where we may want to pop up help for explaining some of those attributes. And then on the React side, some of the things that will be coming up, we're working on a native log viewer, which hopefully will be introduced as a beta component next month. And that's currently collaboration between the cloud platform and the OpenShift team. So that's pretty exciting. More flexible list variants that include some additional styling for just static lists that are placed within text content. An attribute value search enhancement to our search input, which allows for inputting attribute value search expressions either from the keyboard or in an attached search form, drill down menu pattern, and continued fixes to the resizable drawer. Katie gave a great demo of the drawer that we've introduced, and so the React team is continuing to work on some cleanup there. Two other things that I didn't put on here only because they are imminently expected to be released in the first 2021 release, which is due later this week, includes a new slider component, which Michael Coker, I think, showed some of the static HTML mockups for that, but that will be available as a React component. And also a new code editor component that's based on packaging a Monaco code editor. So these are things that should be rolling out soon. And if you want a more detailed view, we do have this PatternFly, this project board, this GitHub project board, which lists, everything is loading very slowly here. Okay, this GitHub project board here lists the things that we are currently we're expecting to work on by release. This is very much of a work in progress, and things get moved around here. But as you can see, we're planning out through the first half of 2021 at this point. And there's a lot of detail on here. So part of my goal in this presentation is to try to cut through some of the detail of all those issues and focus on some of the major new features that you can expect to see coming in the near future. Any questions on any of this? So again, if you have questions on roadmap or priorities or things that you need for your projects, feel free to reach out to me on Slack at any time, and it only helps us it'll only help us plan and be more responsive to the community's needs. So thank you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Nicole.
Thank you. I'll also add that if anyone has any topics, if there's any project teams who are working with PatternFly and would like to either present or have a discussion or anything during these PatternFly community meetings, we would love to open this up to more people. Anytime we have somebody from outside the core PatternFly team presenting, it livens things up, and it gives us a lot of perspective on how PatternFly is doing and what it's doing. So let me know. You can reach out to me or really anyone you can get in contact with on these meetings. And you'll probably be directed to me, and that's great. But we'd love to have more people contribute always to every aspect of PatternFly, including the community meetings. So I will upload the recording of this video to YouTube and send it out shortly, along with the slides, including all the links in the presentation, and a link to the feedback form regarding design guidelines that was talked about at the very beginning of the meeting. All right, I hope. Oh, and I guess we do have a few moments if anyone has any questions. It's been a relatively quiet and enthusiastic cheerleading chat so far, but if anyone has any questions, I can give it a couple moments before I sign off for any discussion or thoughts. And you also welcome to reach out to me or anyone on the meeting to ask questions at any point. But all right, thanks so much everyone for your time, and we'll see you in about 3 weeks. Goodbye.